I'm assuming that you have already finished the exercise 1 to differentiate, to classify the level 1 versus the level 2 variables. As you can see, the variables such as conflict strategies, job satisfaction, proud, smile, suppressed emotion, exhaustion, mood, performance, disappointed, as well as engagement are the level 1 variable. The level 1 variables are usually the diary variable, the diary level variable that we would like to see the fluctuation as well as the variation of this measurement over a period of time. And for the rest, such as age, controlled, social support, team climate, etc., are the level 2 variable. Usually, either they are the personal or the situational factors in affecting the level 1 variable or the relationship between the independent as well as those level 1 variable. From this exercise, you might have the ideas that in what certain level and which measurements should be consist in the level 1 as well as the level 2. And we give you the ideas about the structure of the multi-level data. For the exercise 2, you are working on the hypothesis development. And I'm assuming that you have also worked on this. And in the following, I'm going to show you some of the examples that we can use in order to develop the hypothesis at different levels. Here is an example from a study on emotional work and emotional labor. First, before we go on to talk about the diary study, we will go through the conceptualization of emotional work and emotional labor. Emotional labor refers to the effort that the service provider or the employees put into in order to manipulate and manage their displayed emotion. And the first study of the sociologist and saying that the flight attendants of the Delta airline and they are using some strategies in order to manipulate, in order to manage their displayed emotion. Especially in the service industry, even though the employees, they feel unhappy or their inner emotion is not so positive, but because they have to display the happy emotion when they are having an interaction with the customers, therefore they have to put in effort to manipulate and manage their displayed emotion. This is what we call the emotional labor or emotional work. And here is some of the example. A young businessman says to the flight attendants, "Why aren't you smiling?" And he put her tray back on the food cart and looked him in the eyes and said, "I will tell you what, you smile first, then I will smile." The businessman smiled at her. "Good," she replied. "Now freeze and hold that for 15 hours. Then she walked away. And this story is telling us that indeed, emotional work can be very exhausting and is not necessary to display the emotion from the true emotion. Instead, it may be a kind of the manipulation and manage the display of the emotions. So this is what we call the emotional labor. Indeed, as we can see that emotional labor and emotional work is very often whenever occurred in the interaction with the customer or client, especially in the service industry. The service provider, because they have to meet with different clients, different customers, they always have the interaction with them. Therefore, they have to work and perform the emotional labor. However, it is not only limited to the service provider. In the organization, the employees, because they also need to work together with the peers, because of those interactions, employees may also perform emotional labor, even though they feel unhappy and they don't want to work with certain employees, certain team members, but because they are in the same team, So they also need to perform emotional labor to suppress the unhappy emotion and to display the happy emotion, cooperative, and well, to work together with the peers. Of course, service organization will expect the employees to behave in certain way during the interaction. Therefore, you can see that a lot of the organization have what they call display rules to regulate the displayed emotion of the service providers during the interaction with the customers. And therefore, the friendly smile usually become a job requirement now. So this is the concept of emotional labor. Emotional labor as the paid work which require the regulation of one's emotion. As I said that even though they feel unhappy in their heart and they cannot display it. So that's why on one hand they have to regulate their own emotion. On the other hand, they also need to display the organization desired emotions during the invitation or they have to do some gesture, body language, their voice, etc., to display those desirable emotions. And it is independent of whether or not this corresponds to the inner feelings, no matter whether it is correlated or equals to the inner feeling, but still they have to display such desirable emotion required by the organization. And this is, well, the act of displaying the required emotions. This is what we call the emotional labor. Previous study also shows that employees sometimes they do not express their felt emotion. In this diagram, as you can see that even though the employees feel very surprised, they will not express these emotions. Similarly, as you can see that if the employees feel very sad, they also will not express their sadness emotions in front of the others. And this one will give you the idea is that employees would not always express what they feel. They always engage in the emotional labor to manipulate, to manage their displayed emotion. From this figure, you can see that some of the research already done to test about the relationship between the emotional work in terms of the antecedents as well as the possible outcome. Like the organization and customers, they're going to have the interaction. That's why the employees, they have to perform some emotional work. Emotional work will have certain requirement. They have the requirement to display certain positive emotion, negative emotion, no emotion, or some empathy emotion. It depends on industry and also the work context. For the typical entertainment or service industry, usually employees are required to display positive emotions, such as well in Starbucks and McDonald's, etc. We will expect that the employees they have to smile to the customers during the interaction, so they are the positive emotion. The negative emotions, such as in funeral, those very untypical exceptional service industry, we are not expecting them to have the positive emotions to the client, to the customers. And ideally, if they can also share some empathy emotion or negative emotion, it would be perfect. In some other occupations like police officer, and we are not necessary for requiring them to display positive versus or the negative emotion. Instead, well, they should be calm. So they may not be able or they may not require to display any emotion at all. So all those are the displayed emotion requirement. And of course, the requirements also depends on whether the employees will have the sensitivities on the requirement, whether they can feel it, and whether they can consider that is so important to follow and regulate. And it will create the emotional demands to the service provider, for the workers, for the employees. and well, they have to perform certain emotional work, such as the surface acting. It means that, well, even though they are not happy in their heart, in the inner feeling, but still they have to manipulate, they have to fake the displayed emotion. This is what we call the surface acting. Deep acting is something like the employees, they're changing, trying to modify and change the inner emotion in order to display the desired emotion. Automatic emotion regulations, and so well, they're also using a more automatic way to regulate the emotion. They're not really manipulating too much, and so it's also one of the possible strategies that they may use. Emotional dividends, and so well, it means that even though they feel unhappy in their heart, and well, it doesn't mean that they will display it, and well, probably it's not fully reflected in their face. Outcome. And well, as long as they perform some emotional work, and we find that there are some possible outcome, including like the performance, affecting the performance, as well as some psychological stress, strain, etc. According to the research, usually, well, we can find that if the employees they always perform surface acting, it is very likely to increase the burnout, fatigue, strain, stress level of the employees if they always perform those surface acting in the long run, as well as they will also decreasing their work performance. Research also demonstrating that if the employees they performed deep acting and trying to modify the inner emotions, and so in order to display those relatively true emotions to the customers, and so in the long run, it seems that it is not negatively affecting, and does not lead to this burnout, fatigue, and even will help to reduce the burnout and fatigue as well, and also will increase the work performance. So this is the basic knowledge that we can learn from the emotional labor research. As I described earlier, the process of the emotional work involved the emotional regulation strategies. There are four major types of the emotional regulation strategies. The first one is surface acting, and this is the regulation of the visible behaviors, including like some facial expression, some body language, and also some body gesture and voice, etc., in order to match one's displayed emotions required by the organization. But of course, those display emotion which is not felt, and they just manipulate and fake the emotions. Deep actings are the regulation of the inner feeling to match one's emotional display and also the emotion required by the organization. As I said that, if the employees they feel unhappy, but if they have to display those happy emotion, what do is they have to change the inner feeling by maybe imagination of some positive or happy moment, so that in order to change the internal unhappiness to happiness feeling. Or they're trying to understand, taking the perspective of the customers, so they notice that if they make the customers happy, and so eventually it's good to them as well as good to the organization. So that's why they're trying to change the inner feeling and to display those feelings to the customers. Automatic emotional regulations is a kind of the passive deep acting. It is the regulations of the visible behavior in an automatic mode, because the organizationally desired emotion is automatically required, well, and also elicited by the situation. So actually, indeed, it's a kind of the natural emotions, not manipulating or management of the emotion at all. Emotional deviance and is the displayed, and the felt emotion does not match with the organization desirable emotion, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally. So usually the employees will take these four types of the emotional regulation strategies at work in order to serve the customers during the interaction. Indeed, when understanding the concept of deep acting, it seems quite confusing. According to the literature, the concept of deep acting indeed is a kind of the situational deep acting. It means that the emotional regulation strategies carried out during the interaction. Because whenever what happened and how you're going to deal with the customers, and so whenever you meet with someone and you have to change your inner feelings so that in order to display the happy emotion, etc. So it seems it's a kind of the situational deep acting. However, in some of the research also proceeds that, also suggesting that deep acting can be happen before the interaction. Some of the company like Walmart or Apple company, they also cheer up the employees before they start working. So it's a kind of the practicing before going on stage played a major role at work. And one may also work on one's emotion after an interaction. If one is very upset, and so they have to change their inner emotion in order to get prepared for the next customers. So it seems that the concept of the deep acting is quite mixing, and what we have to consider about what situation the employees deep acting would perform. Therefore, we are suggesting that we can use the diary study in order to investigate the questions. There are 48 participants, including 14 hairdresser, 14 flight attendants, 8 nurses, 7 salesperson, and 5 call center agent. Although their industry, their job nature are quite different, but they got the common sense that they are the service providers. These service providers respond to the questionnaire and to fill in a diary of the 10th working day and provide altogether 385 diary entries. It all because, well, you still have some missing value. That's why, well, they will have 385 daily observation altogether. And the diary was filled in at the end of the working day. So it's just once per day. Participants had to refer to the emotional significant interaction of the day. The response rate is about 47%, and well, it's not very high. There are many reasons for that. One of the reasons because, well, probably you're asking the respondents to respond so many times, and so they will feel very boring, or sometimes they will forget to fill in the questionnaire, or sometimes, well, they feel very tired, they don't want to do it, and a lot of different reasons affecting the lower response rate. And the average age is 32 years, and for 70% were female. Here are the level 1 measures that were used in this diary studies. The diary makes short versions of measurements necessary. We cannot use the full scale because otherwise you ask the participants to answer the question for many times repeated measure. They will feel very boring and annoying. So that's why sometimes the single items could be also acceptable. Or we have to use the short version of the measures. In this research, the researchers using the single item for the quality of the situation, exhaustions, effort, satisfactions with the interactions, etc. They're also using the emotional regulation based on the factor analysis. They're trying to reduce the number of the item used in the diary studies in order to shorten the questionnaire time that required the participants to fill in. In the seminar, we are going to familiarize with SPSS file and make file for the SPSS mixed model for the data analysis. Before the seminar, please download the following SPSS file from the Blackboard system, the emotion days level.sav and also the emotion person level.sav for the preparation. This is the end of part 1. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. See you in seminar. Bye bye.